I am or was a service user. Me and my wife have been married for 16 years. And I've been with her for probably 20. And for almost all of those, we've been dealing with her mental health issues. It started off as a depression diagnosis. She was diagnosed with bipolar 2 after that. We made a conscious decision that we would try and self-manage. And we created coping mechanisms that would limit her damage. That's if she was on a high, so that she didn't have to worry about those sorts of things. Absolutely, she ended up seeing medical professionals. She's been on medication, and that was all very stable. 11 years ago, we had our son, and as a result, we purely, again, a lot of these things, right, purely by chance, we had a health visitor who was interested in mental health. And that resulted in my wife getting some peer support with other mums who had mental health issues. And it really helped her navigate what's it like to be a mum for the first time, which was incredibly important. My son got older. We managed to create a relatively stable environment. We're humans, so nothing's perfect. We'd had our ups and downs, but that was something we expected and we planned for. And then 6 years ago, we found out we were pregnant again, and that wasn't supposed to be a thing that could happen, but it did, and that was fine. And my wife made a decision that she would withdraw from taking all of her medication because she was really worried about how it would affect the baby. She had consultation with her psychiatrist. They agreed on a plan. They withdrew the medication, and she carried on, and she got all the way through to her 3rd trimester. And at that point, it became far too much for her to deal with. And for the first time in our lives, we had to engage the mental health crisis team. And that was kind of our first touch point with perinatal. I will freely admit I didn't know that it was a word before that day. We met our nurse. She got my wife on some medication that would help, but that was safe for both her and the baby. We built a plan. We knew what we were going to do through the rest of the pregnancy and through birth and beyond. My wife got taken into hospital the day before Christmas Eve, 5 years ago. And our baby girl was born on the 27th of December. And my life changed dramatically because 7 hours later, our daughter died. And that wasn't really something any of us had even considered could be a thing. We'd been awake for 36 hours. My wife had an incredibly traumatic birth. We couldn't leave the hospital. My son was staying with my parents. And the law says that the police have to be involved. So suddenly, having been awake for 36 hours, there was a police officer that needed to interview us. And this is all within hours of me and my wife saying goodbye to somebody who was 7 hours old. We had to stay in hospital for like 3 days before my wife was physically well enough to be able to come out of hospital. But during that time, I had to manage the relationship with the hospital and the different practitioners that wanted to speak to her or try and treat her, with the police, with the coroner, because we were told that there was a requirement for an autopsy. But on that first night, we sat in the hospital and we said, we need to find a way to make this a net positive, that our girl would have a positive impact in the world, and that is why I'm here. When I got my wife home, we had to bring my son home, who was 5 at the time. We had to explain to him what happened, and we had to try and work out what on earth we were going to do next, because I don't think anything prepares you for this sort of thing. The fact that we dealt with my wife's mental health for the best part of 2 decades, though, meant that we knew we needed to ask for help. And the fact that we knew that, I think, was incredibly powerful. I'm going to digress a little bit now. I need to talk about my perinatal nurse. Her name was Helen. She is one of the most amazing people I've ever met. If she knocked on my door today, I've not spoken to her in longer than I'm comfortable with, but if she knocked on my door today, we would be sat around over coffee and cake in literally minutes. She is part of my family, and that is the power of a really good perinatal nurse, right? These people are amazing, and we need more than them. But I have a very vivid recollection of a conversation I had with her in the hospital corridor the day after my daughter died, and she asked me how I was doing, and I didn't know what to say. Throughout this entire journey, we'd almost been solely focused on my wife's needs and the baby's needs, and now there's somebody else stood there saying, "How are you?" And I said to her, "I can't do feelings right now. I just need to keep going, but I can't keep doing that. I can't sustain that. And when I fail, I need you to look after my family." And at the time, those were the only words I had. Now, I know now that failure is the wrong word, because I didn't fail. I was human. We saw our perinatal nurse like multiple times over the next month or so. We had questions for her. She helped us answer the questions that our son had, because he would ask questions like, "Well, is Libby coming home tomorrow then?" Because he was that young that he didn't understand the concept that she would just be gone forever. He was promised a sister, and Mummy and Daddy had gone to bring her home, and now there was nothing there. We actually went looking for counselling, mental health support, and through the relationship we had with the hospital, they said, "Oh yeah, there's these 6 one-hour sessions you can have," and it was in Addenbrooke's, which is 35 miles away for us. And that it just wasn't a thing that could work for us. The couple of weeks after we came out of hospital, I have described as the worst of my life. My wife blamed herself for my daughter's death. My son needed to go back to school, so I had to go and deal with explaining to the school what had happened and why he might not be quite the same kid he was when he initially left for the Christmas holidays. We had an entire room ready for this child that never came home. And everybody's favourite online shopping site knows exactly when I was buying baby stuff. So there must be a baby by now. And therefore, here's offers for things you would need for a newborn. And they come by email and they come by post. And most of them come to my wife, which is worse. But I paid for a whole bunch of the stuff. So now they come to me as well. And about 2.5 weeks in, I sat on the floor of my bedroom and I cried. And because I had nothing left, and I felt like I had failed my wife, my son, my family, because I was trying to manage effectively the grandparents who wanted to help but didn't know what to say or what to ask, and were absolutely terrified of asking the wrong question. And I genuinely felt that there was nowhere for me to go, and I just wanted all the pain to stop. I was ridiculously lucky with what happened. A friend of my dad happened to be a therapist, And my parents footed the bill for me to go and see him because I wasn't back at work. And I wasn't actually in a fit state to go back to work for nearly 3 months. But I had a very supportive employer who said, you need to deal with you, right? Don't worry about us. We'll deal with us. You deal with you. And I don't think many people get that kind of Venn diagram of access and the ability to pay for it, and an employer that doesn't say, no, 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 you're employed here, for want of a better word, get your bum back to work. I spent 2 years in therapy, and it was literally as COVID arrived that I started to feel like I needed to try and deal with this on my own. Now, that's 2 years of seeing somebody at least twice a week. Now, remember what was offered to me at the beginning, right? 6 hours. That we weren't going to deal with what was wrong in 6 hours. In that first year, my wife got help from perinatal. They were there for about 3 months before they needed to move on. Part of the problem is that where we were, perinatal was incredibly new when we engaged them. I believe we were the first infant death that they had experienced as a unit. And perinatal, by its nature, almost plans for success, right? It always plans for mum comes home with baby. What's the plan for that? And when there's no baby, there's not really that opportunity for them to provide support because they're so thinly stretched that they need to go and look for or help other families. So they managed to provide us with some consistency of care, which is incredibly important. Like I said, if our perinatal nurse walked in the door now, or if she's on this Zoom, I would have called her out by now. She is amazing and I love her to bits. But we managed to get an NHS psychiatrist that provided continuity of care for my wife. My son ended up seeing a counsellor for 2 months because he got to a point where he took his next mental leap in growing up and started asking a whole bunch more questions that he just couldn't cope with. Again, that's not something that we could immediately get him access to unless we paid for it. But I was back at work, so that was a thing that we just needed to do. The first anniversary of Libby's death was just a really sad day, but it's right in the middle of the Christmas period, and trying to explain to children that actually you don't really want to do a great deal right now is not fantastic, but we got through it, and I was convinced from that point on that we were going to be okay, right? If we can get through that, we can get through, things are getting better. What actually happened was that the second year was far worse. I started having flashbacks about 2 months before the second anniversary, and it got to the point where I was too scared to go to sleep because I didn't want to see what I was seeing again and again and again. I got signed off work. I ended up going back I went back and saw the therapist more often. I ended up getting help sleeping from my GP. But I managed to get to that point because I was in an incredibly privileged position of being able to access private help, and because of the actions of a few good people. Helen very much at the top of that tree. I am very, very aware that this is not going to be the case for the vast majority of people that need this help. If peer support existed, these peer support groups that I've now found existed when I was going through this, I did not know how to find them. They were not readily signposted in places I went or to people I spoke to. I did the typical male thing, which is assuming what's called a paladin role, which is effectively you protect everything else and there is no personal cost that is too high. The professionals I spoke to, I saw them as that, right? they were professionals, they could help me, but they had not lived my situation. I saw them as professionals rather than peers or equals. I would obviously exclude Helen from that. I didn't have somebody that said, yeah, I know how you feel, mate, or I don't worry about it. Yeah, that sort of thing's totally normal. Yes, you should expect to feel like that. I mean, men in general don't seem to talk very much about our feelings. I'm very aware that it is seen as a sign of weakness. I have a particular issue with the phrase "man up" because that somehow means that if you just carry on, you're better. And the fact that the care and the support that's needed to deal with these sorts of complicated issues needs to be measured in years, not weeks or hours, right? Peer support has to be the thing that achieves this. Even if I just ignore the tragedy that my family suffered and I go right back and look at my first time of being a dad, right? That was nearly 11 years ago, but nobody prepared me for nappy rash, sleep regression, teething, and you have these tiny little things that go wrong and you feel incredibly out of your depth, and then you feel like a terrible parent. And I genuinely wish that I had somebody that could have said, yeah, no, you didn't give your kid nappy rash. Yeah, I know he's gonna scream. That's what they do. But here you go, try using this, or try this, or something that meant I could learn that it was just a normal part of parenting and that actually everybody else was dealing with the same thing.